Hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. Since you're here, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and do share the video as well so that more people get to know about Bharata First. Do subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs several quizzes. Participate in them. If you like our content, please contribute to keep it alive. Let me also take this opportunity to inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you in your competitive exams and transform the way you learn. Go to kc.bharatafirst.com for more details and register now. Experience a whole new way of gaining knowledge. Hundreds are already reaping the benefits of the Knowledge Center. Don't be left behind. Register right now. There's so much more that we have to offer. All this information, along with some must-see recommendations, are in the description of the video. Please go through it. And now, on to the discussion. Union External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar on Monday said that the Quad grouping is the solution to resistance towards reformation of international organizations. Days of unilateralism are over. Bilateralism has its own limits, and multilateralism is simply not working well enough. Jaishankar was quoted as saying by news agency ANI as he delivered a keynote address at the JG Crawford Oration in Australian National University. S Jaishankar was speaking on India's perspective on the Indo-Pacific and India-Australia relations in the face of global security challenges and rising economic and human toll from the coronavirus disease. Now, he stressed that Asia and the Indo-Pacific are vast expanses with greater diversity and less collective persona. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze what the External Affairs Minister said about unilateralism, bilateralism, and multilateralism, and the way forward for global institutions. Joining me on the program today are Dilip Sinha, former ambassador, Jayantas Gupta, former ambassador of India at the WTO, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Ambassador Sinha, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze, the comments made by the External Affairs Minister about the Quad, about what role the Quad has for the future, and also, interestingly, about unilateralism, bilateralism, and multilateralism.
This comment, I think, has been made in the context of the global disenchantment with the United States of America and its policy in Afghanistan, because there is very strong criticism both within America and outside of the manner in which the US has abandoned both the government it had set up in Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan, to whom it had painted a very rosy picture of democracy and development. And then 20 years later, it bypasses the Afghan government, goes and signs a deal with the Taliban, and then tells the president to run away. And the Taliban just walk in and take over the government. And the US is now helping the Taliban come into power and stay in power through its allies, Pakistan and Qatar. So that puts in jeopardy the Indian strategy of strengthening the Quad. India had placed a lot of faith in the Quad as the power alliance and power structure that would counter China and the aggressive China that we are seeing today. So in these circumstances, people have now started questioning, how can you trust America? And if you're going to put your eggs in the American basket, what will America do when India needs America? America may just walk away and say, we're not interested in this. So there is this dilemma that I think our policymakers have to confront and deal with. That traditionally, we had at one time in the Cold War, we had put our faith in Russia and the Soviet Union, which had helped us in the Security Council and also during the 71 war. After the Soviet Union collapsed, we went through this catharsis, and we finally patched up with America, and our relations with America improved, and finally culminated in that nuclear deal and various other relations. And then on top of that came this aggressive Chinese policies for the last 3-4 years. And in this, we had put our faith in America. So now we are confronted with a situation where we don't know where we are going. On the one hand, we want a permanent seat on the Security Council, but the Security Council itself has become a fairly comical organization. It has seen Afghanistan collapse. The resolution because of the divide that there is between the P5. So even if India enters the Security Council, does it stand to gain anything by getting in there? What will the Security Council do? And when it comes to alliance structures, are there any reliable alliance partners that India can look to? So India today now has to start thinking about its foreign policy scenario where you have a threat perception. Earlier it was only China and Pakistan. Now there is also a terrorist organization sitting in Kabul and other terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and the ISK who are now licking their tongue and the tail to see what they intend to do in the region. So in this enhanced security threat, we have to look for our foreign policy options.
Absolutely. Mr. Dasgupta, let me come to you now, and let's talk about this issue of multilateralism. And the EM has spoken about how multilateralism is not working. Would you agree with that? And what is the way forward for multilateralism?
I do think that the post-war multilateral organizations, which are chiefly four, the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO, of these, at least two are not working. The UN system definitely needs a rejig. It has not been functioning properly, and it has not been able to prevent war, to bring wars to a quick end, and it has generally been very ineffective. The second organization, which functioned quite well till about 1994, was the GATT, and then it transformed into the WTO, and it has since then not been able to make progress in terms of providing greater benefits to the developing countries, which is one of the objectives which are there in the Marrakesh Agreement setting up the WTO. As far as the World Bank and the IMF are concerned, the World Bank, I wouldn't say has done badly. It has provided benefits to a large number of developing countries. And the IMF also has succeeded in providing stability in the international economic scenario. So on balance, I think the role of multilateralism has been very significant. It has succeeded in some cases, but it has also failed in many other cases. So I wouldn't say that multilateralism has failed completely. The next point is that where do we go from here? Unilateralism, as Minister Jaishankar has also mentioned, is the days for unilateralism are over. No one country can lord over the rest of the world and have its diktats followed by all other countries. As far as bilateralism is concerned, it will probably carry on in some form or the other because of obvious advantages and the asymmetry of power between countries. In fact, there are political scientists who have termed the UN system also as a special form of bilateralism in which powerful countries like the US, they have their way and they decide the course of action themselves and more or less trust it on the other countries, including, for instance, the way the US has intervened in Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, etc. So multilateralism, as the Australians call it, mini-lateralism, which is a form of plurilateralism, I think that is going to stay. Even in the case of the WTO, you find that the trend is now moving towards having an agreement amongst a few countries which think in a like-minded manner. And then others who are sitting on the sidelines can join if they agree to make certain sacrifices and agree to abide by a common discipline. So I think multilateralism in the post-war sense may have run its course for the time being, but new institutions are likely to emerge in view of the changing scenario and the emerging reality.
Absolutely. Ramit, let me bring you in now. Let's talk about bilateralism. And, the foreign minister has spoken about how there are limits to bilateralism. Das Gupta also touched upon that. So when you look at bilateralism, what are the kind of limits that we are looking at? And, at a time when the world order is changing, we are moving into a very complex kind of a situation. Would you then not say that bilateralism probably is the best option that we have in present times?
Bilateralism, I mean, what we're seeing as we are developing, let's say in the case of India, we have a set of bilateral relations. For example, in West Asia, our entire foreign policy is built around a bilateral relation because we don't want to get involved in their plurilateral structures because of the deep divides in the fault lines in West Asia. We have tried without much success to try to make the South Asian countries merge together, but the problem has always been Pakistan. So we've now moved away from SAARC. We've investing a little in BIMSTEC, but fundamentally we have now essentially another set of bilateral relationships that are working there. We're also now working with ASEAN, but ASEAN is now a dying organization. It is incapable of responding to China. Half its members are in Beijing's pocket, and it's now become completely paralyzed. So again, we're now working with a set of countries within ASEAN to develop the larger strategic relationships. The only multilateral organization we are genuinely investing in and is rising has been the Quad. And now the new structures, it's a very loose coalition, but it's designed to be highly flexible. We talk to the Japanese, the Americans, the Australians, and the Indians about this, officials about this. They're very clear. The Quad is never going to be like NATO, but it will be the core of a whole set of different alliances and coalitions, which revolve a lot around technology as much as anything else, because in many ways, that's where the 21st century battle will go on. And then you have what is clear, I think, on the American side. If you saw the Biden administration's interim national security guidelines that they issued in March, Central Asia does not matter for the United States or the West anymore. It has no strategic consequence to them. Afghanistan was just a giant black hole sucking $40 billion out of the American defense budget. And that will now all be transferred against China. This was indicated to the Indian side even 3 years ago that this was going to be happening, even during the Trump administration and a little bit during the Obama administration. So I don't think there was any real surprise on the Indian side. In fact, I know there was no surprise that the Biden administration following this path or continued the path that was going on. The real question is, what do you use? What do you redirect your attentions to as far as the United States and the Quad are concerned? And very clearly, China is fundamentally at the heart of almost everything that is being done with these three countries. We, of course, have to maintain a position on the Western side. But our position is, I think, very straightforward. We have a border. Our border with Central Asia is our border with Pakistan. And I think we will maintain the policy that we did after Pulwama. We don't care whether there's a terrorist attack out of Afghanistan into India. Our retaliation will be focused, and it'll be public and military, on Pakistan. And we will hold Pakistan responsible for whatever happens out of Afghanistan or even what happens out of Bangladesh. The key is that we're now developing a whole set of new bilateral relationships. For example, Mozambique. Mozambique is now, if you look at kind of investment plans India has, Mozambique is going to become, if they are successful, one of the top 5 nations as far as our energy and our economic assets are concerned. And it is a country where we now train their intelligence service, their army, their navy, their diplomats. These are the kind of new bilateral relationships that we're seeing developing. And these are a consequence of the very deep shifting geopolitical and, I would say, bilateral interests of India as a whole. We've had bilateral relationships, obviously, with almost every country in the world. but a lot of the original multilateral organizations that we used to work with are now, as I mentioned, like ASEAN, dying or in very poor shape. Some of them, like the European Union, are also struggling in their own way. They are important, obviously, in the trade and economic front. But a lot of other issues, we continue to have bilateral relationships within the European Union that are much stronger than our relationship with the European Union itself, or the Europe as a whole. And we now have new relationships. Britain is now a separate bilateral relationship in a way that it wasn't before. And if we are successful in doing a new FTA of any variety, the first one will be with Britain itself. We're now trying to develop a new relationship with Taiwan, a country that we don't officially even recognize, but is now at the heart in many ways of 21st century technology in the semiconductor side, for example. And there's new set, when we look at some of the countries in artificial intelligence, in green technology, and at the heart of all of these, we need these new relationships for our economy, but all of them have to be ex-China, because that is fundamentally what we are doing our own soft decoupling from China. And that's why a lot of new bilateral relationships have to basically be brought.
Right. Okay. Points taken. Let me take the points that you're making forward then with the other panelists. So, Ambassador Sinha, coming back to you now. You also spoke about how there are new challenges that are emerging really as far as India's foreign policy is concerned. That's something that you mentioned about in your opening remark. Let me take you back to that now. Would you say that we are entering into a difficult phase as far as our foreign policy is concerned?
Yes, I think we are, because as I mentioned, some of the stipulations that we had earlier have come into question. One of these was that we wanted to move towards a multipolar world. And in that context, we went for BRICS, and we joined the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because we also joined China on basic climate change negotiations. So the idea was that we should diversify our partnerships across the world and let the world become more multipolar. But we realized that one of the things that we had done earlier was to have opposed a US-dominated international order and moved towards multipolar order. But we soon found that China was behaving exactly the same way as the US was. And China also wanted to dominate the world order and be as unilateralist in its dealings with international organizations as the US was. So, for example, in the South China Sea case, where Philippines wanted to take it for arbitration, China refused to accept the arbitration award. So that meant that that policy of ours of trying to develop a multipolar world went into a limbo. And today, as I mentioned, with the US policy coming into doubt, we genuinely have a problem on our hands. We now have to start looking at, as Pramit mentioned, issue-based partnerships or alliances and coalitions, possibly most likely bilateral, because we do not have an across-the-board acceptance of views or confluence of views that was there earlier. For example, in the case of Afghanistan and Central Asia, now Afghanistan may not be important for America, and America might say, okay, let help. But we cannot do that. We can't extricate ourselves from this region. And if there is rise fundamentalism and terrorist operations in Afghanistan, then it may not be a major security threat to India, but it certainly will be a big nuisance for us, because our security forces will be busy tackling these forces, encouraged by the ISI of Pakistan, to act against India. So we have to deal with that threat, and the US, it might say we are walking out of this region, but we have to stay in the region because we are part of this region. So while the US policy on Quad may be useful when it comes to dealing with China, when it comes to dealing with Pakistan, I don't think it will work. So there we'll have to look at some other strategies. So these are the challenges that we have to face today in our foreign policy.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Dasgupta, would you say that we are heading more into a strategic and a security kind of a realm rather than economy at the moment? And how important is economy going to be going forward, really, as far as foreign policy is concerned?
That's a very interesting question. Change in the world order with the emergence of China has changed the equations relating to international trade, for instance, in a way that it has not changed in the past 70, 80 years. So China is now the predominant manufacturer and exporter and trader in the world. The next issue is China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, has entered the economy of more than 70 odd countries. The count may be more. And then there is this issue of indebtedness, because there is a certain period after which the countries are expected to pay back to China. Now, what happens to these countries? We already have seen that the Sri Lankans have been unable to pay for Hambantota. The Pakistanis are already facing difficulties and are getting bailouts from the Saudi Arabians till recently, and then the Chinese themselves. But it is not going to be a sustainable kind of a solution. So this will provide a great deal of tension in foreign relations, because there would be countries which would then try to go around to the International Monetary Fund, for instance, for bailout. And one of the fears which the IMF had in Pakistan also was that the money that they would pay to Pakistan would go straight into the hands of the Chinese. So that is the second dimension. The third issue is, because of COVID, there has been and the attendant rise in unemployment has led to a great deal of demands for having reshoring of manufacturing jobs, for instance, in the US, and for raising the barriers to trade, visible or invisible, so that more people from the country itself can get employment. Now, this has found resonance even in Europe. For instance, in Britain, one of the major reasons why Britain decided to exit from the European Union was primarily the hollowing out of the economy and the influx of chiefly East European workers into Britain, taking away, they thought, the jobs of the British. Now, this is going to be another thing which will militate against greater opening up of international trade opportunities. And this is likely to last for the next 5 to 10 years, till events like disruptive technology, like a revolution in manufacturing, for instance, in the adoption of digital technology, changes the ground rules. One doesn't know in what way it will do it, because there are issues like 3D manufacturing, additive manufacturing, as it is called, and artificial intelligence and various other things, which are likely to have an impact on employment in the third world also, apart from the impact on the developed world. So basically, I think if you willing to abide by the rules and play by the rules. So that is the first problem. The second is China's aggression and China territorially, as well as to dominate the world in all other areas. That is, I think, perceived to be a threat, and rightly so, by the US, the developed world, and many of the neighbors with whom China shares a common boundary. So this is likely to get transformed into security relationships, as you have rightly hinted at. And the mini-lateralism or plurilateralism that is likely to take place in the form of, let's say, the Quad or the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, or the Indo-Pacific Initiative, for instance, or the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. These are all basically meant to contain China, to make it play by the rules. Whether the rest of the world can compel China or persuade China to do that remains to be seen. And what is the time frame for that is the next question.
Absolutely. Pramit, coming back to you now. Considering the situation in Afghanistan, considering how the United States has pulled out of the region, does this mean that countries like India and others, especially in the region, need to do a massive rethink about how they engage with the United States going forward?
Well, I think the point is this, that the United States is now very clear in its own statements, and you'll note that we are no longer a superpower capable of handling everything in the world. And in particular, we now face a challenge in the form of China, literally the most powerful challenge America's ever faced. China's economic capacities dwarf that of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is no comparison to what what China is today. Not only because of its technological capacities, the size of its economy, but the degree of integration it has. So if America has to remain in the Asia Pacific at all, otherwise it can retreat to just the Western Hemisphere, then it must focus everything solely on handling China. So therefore, you can see America has now begun pulling back, if you wish. Afghanistan was the most striking version of this. But it's not just there, it's in the Middle East as well. They've pulled back 8 Patriot missiles, hundreds of fighter squadrons, fighters, 1,000 troops. They've said we're ending our combat role in Iraq by the end of the year, because they don't see West Asia as being all that important to them, other than areas like the Levant, where Israel is, and bits and pieces of Saudi Arabian Peninsula. But they made it clear we're no longer interested in areas in which we do not have a direct strategic interest. And if those parts fall apart, well, that's it. America is not there to hold those pieces up. So either the regional powers do it themselves, or if China's interested, they can go in and try themselves. China, in fact, is actually very nervous about this. So you can see China, when America announced under the Biden administration that we're pulling out by September, the Chinese government actually said, let's not be so hasty about this. And they actually said America should slow down its withdrawal, and has been extremely nervous as to this, because it not only has that, it has Myanmar, it has North Korea on its borders, none of which it's particularly happy about their present condition. But that's where America is going. The question, therefore, is where does America focus? And it's very clear. It's decided the Indo-Pacific, and to a lesser extent, obviously, Africa. And of course, the Atlantic has always been its traditional area of interest. Those are going to be the only parts of the world that America will focus on. So the degree of overlap you have with America on that front, that determines where your relationship with the United States is. So, for example, you'll notice a lot of the East Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, even Singapore, have actually quietly said, that's great that you pulled out of Afghanistan, because it was a waste of your time. Bilari Kausikan, a famous Singapore diplomat, wrote an op-ed piece in Straits Times, and he said, America was in Afghanistan to defend its Central Asian interests. The only Central Asian interest it had was the fact that it was in Afghanistan. So they said we could never understand, after the 10th year that they were there, we couldn't understand why America just continued to waste its time. And more importantly, I think, and this is important to understand for Biden's calculations, is that it is because of wars which the American establishment could not explain to its own public that people like Donald Trump came to power. There was an enormous populist reaction. The people who support Trump are the people whose sons and daughters are going to fight in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's not the coastal elites of New York and California. It's the people from the Midwest and the South. And they basically turned against it. They just said, we're tired of an establishment that can neither provide us economic benefits, hence the anti-trade position that America has adopted, and then wants us to get into wars which we do not understand. So America's view is very simple. We focus only on those areas that are important. So what's important for India? It is clear to us, I think, it's overwhelming that the Sino-Indian relationship is now in a death spiral. There is going to be no ability on India's part to get any agreement with China on almost anything. And that relationship is effectively now our number one strategic threat. Yes, Pakistan is there, but it's interesting that when I've talked to people in the foreign ministry or the people close to the NSA, they said, but Pakistan is increasingly a subset of our China problem. In other words, when we want to have a problem with Pakistan, the simplest solution is to go and yell at Beijing. And Pakistan responds now almost only to one country in the world, and that is China.
Absolutely.
So in a way, you now have a foreign policy that essentially is a cascade that starts in China and then works its way around us. And increasingly, obviously, our problems in Nepal, our problems in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, everywhere you see it's a Chinese hand. So it's very clear that's only one country that we're really going to be focusing on, with subsets underneath it, obviously, that we'll have to manage on our own. But it's one reason why we keep maintaining a relationship with Russia, even though that's dying. And it's largely now giving a lot of money to Russia every year to keep them happy. But we have to keep that going solely because we need them for some of these subsets that I was talking about.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, time to get quick closing comments now with the best way forward, starting first with you, Ambassador Sinha.
Well, I agree that we need to, as I said, in the context of Pakistan and Afghanistan, we need to develop our relations independently with Iran and with Russia, two countries that are extremely important in this region, which have an interest in Afghanistan. The US has withdrawn. And the other is that given the uncertainties and the uncharted waters in which our economy is, in the world politics is going, we also need to get over our nuclear restraint that has been imposed upon us by the Indo-American nuclear deal. We have to realize that we are on our own now, and all those global multilateral restraints that were imposed on countries, especially on us, because of that deal, those deals are off, and we should not depend upon our own nuclear policy, which should include a nuclear weapons policy to ensure that we are able to defend ourselves against an aggressive China.
Absolutely. So Das Gupta.
I think Pramit has outlined the impact of America's vacating its superpower position and dominant position as a peacekeeper of the world. So, considering the neighborhood that we are in, we need to be self-reliant, which Dilip has also stressed. And the nuclear doctrine is one of the things which probably needs a reset sooner rather than later. The second point is that the Americans will still have an interest in the Indo-Pacific. They may not want to do it unilaterally as they had done by coming to the rescue of the Japanese, for instance, in the Senkaku Islands and flying over the Chinese air base over an untenanted island. But we will need to engage with the US and have initiatives like the Quad, for instance, to bring in Japan and Australia. And if possible, Germany and France had also at one point of time expressed interest in it. Indonesia is, after its hobnobbing with the Chinese in a sense, has now also got disillusioned and is looking for ways of combining or collaborating better with the Americans. So I think we will need to engage them. And the third factor which I need to point out is that though Russia is in a very bad state economically and is now reliant on large doses of aid or whatever from China, we need to keep the Russians also on our right side, because the Russians have a strategic role to play in this bipolar world. And the Russians have been very staunch allies of us. They have provided us with a lot of arms and platforms which we use in our defense forces. So we need to keep have a tightrope walk between the US and also keep the the Russians interested, and have as many plurilateral initiatives with other countries, preferably, the Quad is one of them, but preferably with the ASEAN countries, if some of them are willing to step out of line and engage with us for mutual benefits, for cooperation in security matters.
Absolutely. And Pramit, close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
I think I'll just stress the importance of the so-called technology alliances that are trying to be built around the Quad plus. Future global economy, at least those economies that are going to succeed, are going to be built around things like green energy, hydrogen, 5G, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. All of these are going to be the heart of what the next, in many ways similar to how the Industrial Revolution transformed Europe from being a backwater into being the most dominant continent in the world back in the 18th, 19th century. So this is going to be the future. China realizes this very well. If you can see what they're doing across the world, the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative, is now as much about digital and data technology as it is about anything. China literally tells countries, let's have a BRI agreement. In return, you have to give me all of the facial data, recognition data of your entire population has to be given to a Chinese company. And there are countries that have done this. We will build an Internet of Things. We will build a 5G structure that will keep out everybody else. This is now in many ways the cutting edge of what the BRI is all about. The American response, which is the Quad Techno Alliance system, is exactly in many ways an attempt to respond to what China is doing on that front. When Bob Lighthizer, the last USTR, which was of the Trump administration, when he would talk to the Indian side about trade, he'd say, look, the blueberries and the dairy products, that's what the White House wants. What I want is digital data understanding, because those are going to be the future of international trade, and they will determine investment flows, because that's the real future of what's going to happen. And that's where I think that's where multilateral economics, if you wish, is going to be going. And it'll be geoeconomics. We're going to see whatever you agree with the United States and the Quad is going to keep China out, and whatever China agrees with is going to keep up the Quad members.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave to that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, what's coming out of this discussion is that the US pulling out of Afghanistan in the manner that it did has come as a big dampener. India now has to deal with China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan on its own and not depend on anyone. New Delhi has to be self-reliant and focus on what is in our best interest. The time for unilateralism is indeed over. Multilateralism has had a mixed response. And considering the current geopolitics, bilateralism with its limitations seems like our best bet. Independent relations have worked and are going from strength to strength. Issue-based ties is the best way forward. We have to engage with everyone based on issues so that we can put our best foot forward. The future of tech alliances is here, and that is what we need to focus on in the immediate near future, because that's one thing where we don't want to be left behind, and we need to move away from China and look for new alliances and new relationships with regards to tech alliances. Now, before I go, once again, let me remind you to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the video as well so that more people get to know about Bharata First. Do subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs several quizzes. Do participate in them. If you like our content, please contribute to keep it alive. Let me also take this opportunity to inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you in your competitive exams and transform the way you learn. Go to kc.bharatafirst.com for more details and register now. Experience a whole new way of gaining knowledge. Hundreds are already reaping the benefits of the Knowledge Center. Don't be left behind. Register right now. There's so much more that we have to offer at the Knowledge Center. All this information, along with some must-see recommendations, are in the description of the video. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time. you.